In this lesson, we'll cover the system browser. You may ask yourself, well, what is the system browser and what does it do within Revit? The system browser is an area where you can actually see all of your systems and all the components that make up the system, or components that would be for a system but aren't currently assigned to a system. And it allows you to view the properties, edit the properties, and look at other information used in calculations and reports. So now that we know that, well, where do we turn it on, or where is it? To view the system browser in Revit, go to the View tab, and then all the way to the right, go to the User Interface dropdown. On the User Interface dropdown, checkmark System Browser. This will turn on the system browser on the right side of your screen if it's docked, or it can float. So you could float this window to a second monitor, for example, if you had a second monitor. Now, looking at the dropdown and looking at what's in this list, currently I have systems in groups. Right now I have a group that's unassigned and a group that's assigned, mechanical, for example. And below each one are sub-elements. So the mechanical system, where it says 45 systems, tells me I have 45 mechanical systems defined within my Revit project, and each of those systems has components assigned to it: exhaust components, return components, and supply air components. The unassigned is basically a list of components that aren't currently assigned to a specific system. And you may say, well, how can that be, or what is that? Well, maybe you're using components from a supplier or manufacturer that really don't have all the hooks, or maybe they do have the hooks. And when I mean hooks, meaning connections to each other for these systems to be smart systems or understand airflow or water flow. So those would be unassigned if they're not assigned to a technical system. You could look at different elements too by the drop down on the top. By view, you have systems or zones. If I look at systems, I can sort my list by specific discipline. So mechanical, for example, if I don't want to see plumbing or electrical, or I could do plumbing or electrical. Now, if I wanted to look at the system that's on my screen and its properties, for example, the elements in blue, obviously you could just go over that system and click on it. It would highlight and you would see those elements on the panel in the left in the properties area. But let's use the system browser for this. So if you've clicked anything, just click off of those elements in the white area so nothing is highlighted. And then in the system browser, to see this system, one method is to actually click on it in the actual browser, and it would show you displayed actually in your model. The system I have in my model is the Mechanical Supply Air 32 system. So if you click on that in the system browser, you actually see it highlights in my model. Now, my model is basically cropped, so I don't see this entire floor of systems, although I see everything listed in my system browser. Now, when I click on that system, I see the properties for that system, and I see they're defined on the left in the property area. If you right-click your mouse on the system, you could collapse the list if I wanted to, select all the members of that system. I can run an inspection on it, show in my model where it's at, delete it, run a report, or I can edit the properties. You may say, well, I can edit the properties now. They're over on the left, and I see them. Well, a lot of those properties are grayed out. But if you were to click properties, now the main property for this system is highlighted, and you could go in and edit the properties of this system. Same is true for all the components of the system. For example, below the Mechanical Supply Air 32, if I were to click the first supply diffuser, it will highlight in my model. You may say, well, where is it at? Well, it's actually blue in the highlight, which is blue with the model, but it's on the lower left in that trunk or that branch of my HVAC ductwork. That's actually the diffuser. And the same thing, I see the information for it in the properties menu on the left. And if I also right-click on it in the actual system browser, I have the option to show, to select, delete, or again, choose properties. And if I choose properties, the properties are now enabled for me to modify. Now you may say, okay, that's kind of cool. That works out really well, but what else is there? Well, if you've really looked at the system browser, you'll actually notice a slider bar on the bottom. And if you slide that to the right, you'll actually see predefined columns containing information, values, and other data that's used within the system for calculation or analysis. So here I'm looking at flow rates, size of my system components, maybe the space they're tied to, space number, and then any load or voltage depending on, again, if it's electrical or if it's another system. You could pick and choose these columns too. On the very top to the right, I have a column settings button. Choosing it will allow me to dictate or tell Revit what columns to add or remove from my actual system browser. Go ahead and click OK. To the left of that is an auto fit all columns button, basically auto fitting the columns of whatever you want to display within this actual spreadsheet, if you will. Now, again, this is docked right now, but I could pull this free, meaning it can float, and I could move it to another screen if I want to. Or you can leave it docked and simply slide the panel right and left to view this information for the system. So as a review, in this lesson, we looked at the system browser. We talked about what is the system browser and where it can be located at. We talked about the viewable elements and the being able to view the properties of elements from the system browser, and then also looking at the columns of the system browser to be able to look at and manipulate various data used in calculations or analysis.